So a very welcome all of you in today's class, in the weekly current affair class. Now, current affair is a important topic, and I'm sure all of you must be putting effort. But you know, continue the effort. UPSC, especially the current affair, is a very ongoing process. You can't stop it. So you have to keep maintaining the effort. So let's start. The today's topic in the weekly current affairs would be so there are n number of topics, but I'll take the important ones here. So the job losses during lockdown, then the three areas that put India on the path of growth, highlights of Swachh Bharat, Swachh Sarvechan, issues with grade economy, right to possession to women and issues, Naga peace process, Satluj Yamuna link, China twist in the Teesta challenge, Pakistan Saudi rift. So these are important ones I'll be covering, and then we have some basic topics like these are factual topics. So these you can just read them. If time permits, I'll cover them. So let's start with the first topic: the job losses during the lockdown. And we all know that this COVID-19 is a very challenging time, especially for people in the economy because jobs. So broadly, what are the areas of jobs? So job can be in the areas of the salaried people. Then of course the informal sector, which is almost 85% of India's economy, the daily wage laborers, the informal sector. And then of course we have self-employed people. So everybody is right now facing problem, and we have Center for Monitoring for Indian Economy. So it is a, you can say, a group which comes with the data on the economy on a regular interval. So what the outcome that this report has given is that the young and people have lost more jobs. The informal economy is kind of recovering, the daily wage labor, the small age. But right now we're facing a new problem where the salaried people are losing the job. And why the salaried people are losing job? Because the economy is going down, and the businesses are not coming. The business are not renewing. The new business is not coming, and that is a reason why the companies are trying to reduce the cutting down the cost and focus on the profitability through cutting down the cost. So that is how the thing is. So record job loss. So nearly 6.1 million people might lose jobs if the virus is not contained by September 2020. Okay, so that was the report. The informal jobs have recovered. The jobs were very, you can see the job losses of the small traders and laborers. That has declined. Okay, now this was a job loss during April, and that has declined. So small traders and laborers are the people who are facing the huge brunt. Then the entrepreneurs, the salaried people, and the farm sector is a positive. You can see this is the only thing. The farm sector is the positive. So they've compared the April and July data. So just look at this table, you'll get an idea and just read it. Nothing, there's no logic behind it. It's just that jobs are going down, and hence government will have to come with an approach to solve the problems of the economy. So the CMI data is the salaried people, they suffered a biggest hit during the lockdown, and the total loss is estimated to be 18.9 million. Now remember, this is huge. And these salaried people are in corporate companies, they are in the small companies as well. So that is around almost 2 crore people losing the job. So 2 crore people, which means if they are surviving the family, and every family has average 4 members, so it is impacting almost 8 to 10 crore of India's population. And these people are salaried people. Remember, they had formal jobs, they had income, and this is the brunt of the problem is faced by the economy. The second one is the informal and the non-salaried job. Now here you would see that there has been improvement. If I compare with the last year, the number of people getting jobs, there little improvement from 317 to 325 million. So little increase here in 2.5%. The small traders, hawkers, and daily wage laborers, they were worst hit during the lockdown period, 91.2 million, and so that was it. Now again, these problems are facing problem. The farm employment has been good because the people who left the jobs in urban economy, they all went because this was also a farm period. It was a Kharif season. So during Kharif season, the sowing of the crop happens, and that leads to a good number of jobs in the rural economy. So these are the data that we're having. And CMI, it's a business information company, and it's an independent think tank, and produces economic and business database. analytical tools, and it analyzes data to decipher the trends in the economy. So this is just a fact for an understanding, nothing much here. Now, going forward, how do we revive the economy? So again, the Prime Minister had a conference with CII, and CII is basically a pressure group. So what is a pressure group? CII is a Confederation of Indian Industry. So it's a pressure group of industrialists. Okay, so they all the industrialist people, they make a group and they try to influence government that you should do this or you should bring this policy, and they kind of represent their views in front of the government as well. So CIA is a confederation of Indian industry, a very important body. Now, in its annual meeting, urged to think big and partner with the government in putting India on the path of growth. There is much that can be achieved with government and the state, cooperate together. Now look at some areas. So the first area is of course employment, as we discussed. 85% of people are in the informal sector. So what is informal sector? Informal sector is a sector where people have, there are no regulations here, which means the jobs given by the small players, the daily wage laborers, the petty traders, the rediwalas, the hawkers. So all these are informal sector. So almost 85% people are employed here. And as per the data, 120 million people lost their jobs during the mid-March and mid-April. And unemployment was very high during the lockdown time, almost 27% high. And the reverse migration happened where people, more than 10 million people, moved to their city villages, to native villages. But as the restart happened in the economy, so abhi kya ho gaya, the unemployment rate has come down. So unemployment rate normally in India is around 4-5%. So as for the data, it is 9%. So that is not bad, I would say. But I would say that it is not the true picture, because they are just talking about the number of people who are employed. They are not talking about whether they have the same income as they were having earlier, because people tend to compromise in terms of income. They tend to understand the realities of the economy, and they believe that the only way to survive is, of course, maybe respond or maybe adjust in the present situation. So that is another aspect. Now, how do we address the problem? There are three problems. Now, so jobs can broadly come from two sectors. One are the formal jobs and there are informal jobs. Now, the data might be there, but the different reports have different data. But let's assume the data that we know that CMI has given. So as per them, 85% of population is in the informal sector and 15% people are in the formal sector. So what is the meaning of formal sector? So let's say you work in a government job, you work in a private job where there you get benefits, pensions, benefits like PF, social security, health insurance. Now these people, formal jobs, they are regulated by the government. The regulation is there. The job is relatively secure. They get benefits, and they are regulated by almost 200 labor laws in India. Now the problem here is that even if they are removed, let's say you remove a company from the private job, so they might give you maybe 3 months salary or 6 months salary, and then they will remove you. Okay, so they'll say, okay, we are removing you with 3 months of salary benefit or severance pay or 6 months of salary benefit, or in the same time we'll also allow you to maybe look for a new job. We'll help you in finding a new job. So that is how companies kind of try to adopt the labor laws. Now, but remember, the problem is that these 200 labor laws are very strict, and they support only the 15% of India's people. Yani inko sirf 15% of India's people who are in the regular employment, they get benefit of that. What about the rest of the informal sector? And this is huge number, remember, majority people. So what industry wants, or what globalization want, that these 200 labor laws, they should be maybe diluted a little bit, because the laws have been made in 50s and 60s, and today dynamics have changed. Because of globalization, the laws that should be there in the economy, so the laws should be adapted in the economy as per the needs of the present requirement. But if you are making a law as per the rules of 50s and 60s, that will not serve. So what industry industry wants or the private businesses want, that government should be little liberal here, and they should take a middle path. And in the middle path, they should maybe reform the labor laws. Okay, so we have stringent labor laws to protect workers, but this covers only 15% of the formal sector employment. 85% of the workforce who are informally employed have almost no protection, and employers have almost complete flexibility. So you are in daily wage labor. So I'll say don't come tomorrow, or you are in a salaried also, but I'm giving you in cash. There is no record. So I'll say okay, don't come from tomorrow. Why? Because we don't have work. So we need to address both the formal and the informal sector labor spectrum to get balance between the flexibility and protection for all labor. So that is the first thing. If you maybe just try to reform the labor regulation, the dynamics will change, and that is the need of the hour. Everyone must have a minimum level of protection, and every employer must have minimum level of flexibility. So finding a middle path will help both of them. That is the first thing. MSME, if it is a registered firm, which means naturally it will have a formal employment. But again, in MSME there could be jobs which are contractual, right? And these are majority jobs. So the contractual jobs are of course informal. So everyone must have minimum level of protection. Every employer must have minimum level of flexibility. This calls for a new social contract to define a well-calibrated social security system. This huge project demand a good faith and strong leadership by industry, labor, and government. So we have to ensure the reforms are there so that these 85%, 85% population hai, they should get benefit. The 85% population should also get some security. And if they had a security, remember, then this, in spite of this COVID lockdown, the things would not have so bad. In fact, the lockdown was so bad where people had to leave the job immediately. And there is no option. We can't do anything because the companies will think of surviving in the business. And the one way of cutting the cost is, say that, okay, let's cut down the cost of salaries of the people. And that is where, but if you're in formal job, you cannot be removed directly. In fact, company will have to give you some benefit before removing you. And that is the advantage. The second part is that even today, more than 30% or 35% of India's population live in the cities. And we are expecting that this number will go by 2050. This number will go up to 60%. So this, we have to improve our cities. We have to make massive building program. We have to maybe more liberal land use regulations. Our cities have the least generous floor space indices in the world. New York, Hong Kong, Tokyo have FSI 5 times that of Mumbai. Okay. Again, this multi-year project, it involves state and city government partnering with the private players. So the point here is that one of the biggest problems in urban areas has been housing. So let's improve housing. And for that, we have to look for low cost housing, because people who have income, the low cost people, how can they survive? So we have to find a project, or we have to find a mechanism to help them. We definitely have mechanism. For example, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Urban, it is looking at ways to reform the low cost housing or reviving the low cost housing. But still, we have a long way to go before we can revive the entire thing. India is unique with 70% of population still residing in rural areas. We must encourage migration of people to higher productive occupation in our cities. We must ensure that clean, affordable, and accessible housing is available for all in our cities. The reverse migration is also an opportunity to collaborate with the spreading the geography of the development. Floor space index. Okay, so some students have floor space index. So what is floor space index? So this is the plot, okay, where you make a building. So when you make a building, let's say this is a building. So this area where the building resides, so ratio of this with this, the whole plot, the whole maybe the boundary, and the ratio on which the flats are there. So that is floor space index. Okay, Kiran, I think that's okay. So that is. So we have to strengthen the rural economy. Now remember, rural economy also needs to be strengthened. If rural economy is good, then people will not migrate as they were doing earlier. We need 3 prolonged approach. So this is as per one of the articles in the Hindu. As Ashok Gulati has often argued, it is easiest to grow farmer income by having them grow more valued crop. So you are a farmer. So what you are doing? You are going with a traditional crop, maybe wheat or rice. So let's move to a new crop, and that new crop would be maybe fruits, vegetables. In fact, you'll be surprised to know that I belong from a, even though I live in city, but I belong to rural economy. And I was thinking, because government brought a lot of reforms in the agriculture sector, and I was thinking that can we do something in the agriculture, maybe involved in the supply chain, because government rules have been so liberal. And I was thinking that this opportunity, can be availed. In fact, I spoke to some people who are, who are traders in agricultural commodities. So I spoke to them and I said, why don't we collaborate and maybe take the advantage of the rules the governments have made liberal. So that is an opportunity, because now government is liberalizing the agricultural market, and liberalizing the agricultural market, which means that government is saying that you can do business in the agriculture sector like you're doing in the normal sector. Previously, agriculture had a lot of constraint which government is unshackling, and that is good for the economy. So export of fruits and vegetables must be consistently encouraged. So that is how. So fruits and vegetables income is almost twice than normal crops. That's the first thing. Then the palm oil. So palm plantation have huge potential, and here again we need to put effort. But we are importing palm oil. But if we are able to push the palm plantation, then things might change tomorrow. Recently, government came with the Atmanirbhar agriculture reforms, which permit contract farming, open up agricultural market, and other major medium-term reforms. Implemented right, they can transform agricultural market. So, what is the problem in agricultural market? If I tell you in a nutshell, in 2 lines, if I would tell you, the problem right now, the problem in the agricultural market is that our farmer, the Indian farmer, it does not get the right price, and the whole market is manipulated by people who are middlemen, the traders, and they take the maximum advantage. Now, what we have to do, that we have to probably find a way in which this middleman is removed, or the interference of middleman comes down, or even if the middleman is there, remember middleman will be there. You cannot remove them completely, but even if the middlemen are there, these middlemen, you can say, these middlemen, the share of them will be slower. So farmer right now, if your farmer is selling a crop of 100 rupees, so basically farmer is getting 25, sorry, if you're purchasing something of 100 rupees, farmer is getting 25-30%. So why don't we increase it to 50% or 60%? Because if farmer is getting the right price, the income will go, and that money will reflect in the rural economy, and that should be the approach. So right now the objective of the current government is to reform the labor market, sorry, the agricultural market, and that reform will go a long way in liberalizing the whole thing. Okay. We need to encourage agro-processing, fostering entrepreneurship in rural and semi-urban areas, which should combine with local processing. We need to invest more or massively in the rural connectivity. Today, we would be at digital connectivity to road connectivity to level playing field in regardless where they are. So, that means you can use advantage and technology, and that is how things are going to be there. So first is, of course, these reforms. If they bring reforms, one is labor reform, second is improve the living conditions of cities, and third is strengthen the rural economy, which means strengthen the agricultural based economy. And agriculture based economy strengthen, it is touching the 50% of India's population. So if this population gets higher income, so naturally things will improve in coming years. And remember, this COVID-19 is a challenge, because right now government is not able to work in the full capacity. So if the reforms are brought, the maybe you can say reforms bring uncertainty, and it unsettles things also, because you are trying to change things which are going normal. So moment you bring reform, it is basically an opportunity that right now things are already bad, so let's bring reform and allow the reform to adjust to this new situation, and by that time people will also understand. Because let's say what happened, we did demonetization on 16, so that impacted our economy for the next 6 months heavily, and at the same time in the next 2-3 years. But this came in 2000, and this demonetization, when it came, it happened in a normal time. Right now it is a COVID-19, there's a crisis, already business are not happening. So government feels that why don't we allow or bring reforms right now? Because bringing reforms here will not unsettle economy much, because economy is already unsettled. So why don't we use, let's say, how people have adapted. I'll take a very good example of you people. I'm sure a lot of you people want to go, study in the offline mode. A lot of people are adapted to offline mode. I'm a complete offline person. Though even I started my career, full-fledged career in online teaching almost 7 years ago. But then I left that online system, and I focused more on the offline system, because I felt that UPSC aspirants are traditional in nature and they want more of an offline system. But today dynamics have changed. Today things are different. Today people want to study online, and this COVID-19 has kind of questioned, or maybe had forced us to study online in a much different way. Everybody is, I'm sure, adjusting and adapting to this new process. Most of us have already done. But remember, the point I want to make here is that that is how the life is. You have to adapt and learn. So we have to bring reforms, and the reforms should be the neither are. And more reforms are brought in. They will, they will work on ground. And outcome is something that we need to improve. The task is huge. Only collaboration is needed between the union, state, and city, and our dynamic private sector can help in the substantial progress. So that would be the objective of working to the path of growth. Now I'll take important topics and then I'll come the less important topics in the end. Swachh Sarvechan. So what is Swachh Sarvechan? It's a survey of cleanest city, and as per the survey, it is annual clean, as Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, SBS, Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. The survey is conducted, and this survey is conducted by Quality Council of India, QCI. And as per them, they have come with the numbers also. So the states with more than 100 local bodies, and Chhattisgarh, Maharashtra, Gujarat. Okay, so these are number of cleanliness numbers. So Chhattisgarh has the highest score in the Swachh Sarvechan assessment among the 12 states, having more than 100 local bodies. Let's understand them. It is an annual survey of cleanliness, hygiene, and sanitation of cities and towns across India. It ranks India's cities, towns, and states based on sanitation, waste management, and overall cleanliness. It was launched as a part of Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, which aimed to make India clean and free of open defecation by 2nd October 2019. So what is open defecation? Doing latrine outside in open. The first survey is on 16 and covered 73 cities. And by 19, the city, we have covered 4237 cities. Can you believe that? And it is the largest survey in the world that we are having. Now, again, UPSC might ask this part, what is the methodology? So it is taken by Quality Council of India, and the criteria and weightage for different components are already there. So first is municipal corporation is done. So municipal documentation, solid waste management, door-to-door collection, processing, disposable, open defecation free status, and that carried 45% of the marks. Yani 45% is based on how well you are able to clean your city. That is the first thing. The second is student. What are the feedback of citizens? How you feel? 30% is here. And the third one is, of course, independent observation, which is 25%. So these are the three broad criteria, and people writing prelims should take a note of that. Surat in Gujarat and Navi Mumbai in Maharashtra bagged the second and third spot. Indore is the first spot. Okay. Maharashtra, Karad, Saswad, Lonavala bagged the first 3 points in cities having less than 1 lakh population. Among cities with population between 1 to 10 lakh, Chhattisgarh, Ambikapur was declared the cleanest, followed by Mysore in Karnataka. In fact, Chhattisgarh has ranked the cleanest state in category of states with more than 100 urban local bodies, followed by Maharashtra and Madhya Pradesh. Chhattisgarh was third in the category, and the survey found that Chhattisgarh is the first and only state where every city has achieved open defecation free plus ODF status. So this is a very good important. Maybe this can be a question in the MCQ 2019 prelims MCQ. So which state is open defecation free as per the latest Sarvechan, Swachh Sarvechan 2019? So Chhattisgarh is the answer. Okay, so that completes it. Now this is a very important issue, and I think in past 2-3 weeks this issue has come again and again, and every time there is an article in editorial, and that is why this issue is discussed again. So just 2 weeks ago, what we saw that Supreme Court came with a judgment, and that judgment clarified that women rights to their parents' property is their birthright, and clarified the air of confusion surrounding the issue with previous judgments. Okay, so what exactly is the judgment? In short, the judgment is, if I have to say in one line, today both men and women, they have equal right in their parents' property. Okay, so even if she's married, she has the equal right in the inherited property, unless there is a will. In a normal situation, it will be inherited by both the people equally, unless if there is a will. Unless if there is a will by the parent, and if they want that it should go to somebody, then others a different thing. So Supreme Court has given the judgment and clarified. So Supreme Court highlighted the patriarchal practice of Mitakshara School of Hindu Law, the guiding force of Hindu Succession Act 1956. It settled the confusion created by two of its own antagonistic judgments. So what exactly it said? So earlier एक rule था under which a woman whose parents were alive on September 5 can only allow to have the right to the property in their parents. But again in 2018 case, it said that co-partial rights or birthright, which means co-partial means the inherited right for maybe the heirs. Okay, so you can, it could be boy, it could be both men or women. So earlier it was only men. In fact, जो historical document है, India is a highly the cultural preference is mainly favors men. Okay, and that leads to the decision that women do not get property right. And what happens? The other thing, what happens that woman is treated as istri dhan. Okay, and she is paraya dhan. And being a paraya dhan, she is married off with dowry. Okay, and when she's married out, she practically has no right over her parents property. So culturally, even today, even though Supreme Court might whatever might say, but I personally believe that it is very difficult to implement on ground in 100% spirit, because even today, how the culture or how society wants, that will be followed. But at least in legal terms, it is clear that if there is a property and if there is no will, which means the property can go to both men and women equal, if they are that means in the family. So now set for the idea that co-partial rights of birthright are free from the limitations imposed by dates and any legal notification. The issue that, but there are still issues that needs to be addressed. So first is Istri Dhan issue. Section 14(1) of Hindu Succession Act provides that women can acquire property as a full owner and it can carried over or retained post marriage as Istri Dhan. Okay, so that is also there, which means if women can get property a full owner even after the marriage. There are cases where movable property may have been given to daughter by her father or as an intensely undeclared informal settlement between the descendants. So a common argument क्या होता है? Women are married off and they get dowry. And in that dowry, so what men say, since you got dowry from the house, so hence you do not have a right in the family property because we gave so much to you while during your marriage. So that is one a debate which always there. Okay, and believe me, the society still believes that. The majority still believes that. The older generation still believes that, except maybe some liberal people who have come in the recent time, who kind of believe that both boy and girl should have equal right. Okay, so that is maybe a case, but mostly it is things are different. At the same time, it is quite true that Istri Dhan over time gave way to unethical and illegal practice of dowry. So Istri Dhan, what a very normal practice that I am marrying my daughter and hence I am giving her maybe some gift or help, so that she can get settled in her in the next life, because she has to start a new life at a different place. So that is the basic concept. And hence a woman who is moving out of the house by getting married off, she should be given some dhan so that she can survive, or at least kind of a support. But that later on changed into dowry practice, and that dowry practice became maybe a social malaise, because dowry became where people started negotiating in dowry. The marriages happened only when the dowry is certain, or maybe dowry clarity is there. If the dowry is not given, the woman will be harassed, and we all know the kind of problem that dowry leads to. But the issue of Sridhar needs to be explained further in the light of the judgment. The ruling might impact dowry transactions that continue despite stringent anti-dowry laws. So we'll see maybe in the coming judgment, if again this problem comes in front of court, what they have to say on this. Issues in claiming the right to property. In the rural context, most of the property is in the form of agricultural land, and claiming property may not be easy. With patriarchy, it is doubtful that male heirs will share property-related document and information with of course, the sister or maybe maybe mother. So this is another problem that might happen. Now there's one more thing. Let's say you are a sister, and there is a you have you're a sister and you have a brother. So brother and sister. Now what sister, when she gets married off, and the property, let's say in a normal situation, it will go to brother. So sister does not want to disturb the relationship with brother, and hence she would not claim the right to the property, because she believes that, okay, this property is, I got married and I'm at this other place. So why should I contest? So let's not, disturb the relationship, because culturally that is accepted. Even though legally you can go and claim and say to your brother, see, the half property is mine and half is yours. That is what it should happen in normal situation. But the society believes something, the people believe something, and things are different. And that is why you don't go ahead and claim your right. Challenge of societal change. On occasion, law and courts may turn out to be progressive. However, we cannot expect society to be readily accede to progressive reforms. The challenge for economically dependent women in far-flung rural areas who are denied literacy, dignity, and sometimes even name and identity in securing their rights is immense. In parts of Bihar, there are areas where women are still addressed by their village names or more commonly by someone's wife. So that is even today. How do you fight society? For example, Khap Panchayat. You must have heard about Khap Panchayat. Now these Khap Panchayats are old traditional system with still kind of unwritten law, is kind of there. So these are unwritten law which are followed in huge parts of, Haryana, Rajasthan, so maybe West UP. So you cannot do anything. Court kuch aur keh raha hai, law is saying something else, but the Khap Panchayat, says, widely accepted, at least in rural areas. So that is still there. But remember, in spite of all the fact, we still have to, keep continuing doing. Tomorrow you might get on the service, you might come across such complaint where women or men are denied of their property right, or they're denied of any right because there's a traditional system which is working. So you might go and maybe, maybe ensure that rule of law prevails and the justice is given to the concerned people. Women are asserting their rights both in conjugal and property matters. However, the significant cultural, religious, and educational barriers and caste class inequalities that require massive overhauling of social attitudes to overcome. Okay, so this is what is needed. Okay, so Preeti has a question. Does this more division of property won't lead to lack of production? Socially, it is good, but even in the form of economics perspective, won't it increase the gap between the output and input? Well, Preeti, if you're talking about rural economy, agricultural land, you can divide the property, but you can still do agriculture together, right? Who is saying that you should do it? It's like it is more about what is legal. So it is your legal right. If the property is divided, it is your legal right that you can do it whatever you want. Okay, so ideally, what government, that the same thing is allowed for men, but why not same things can be allowed for women? Okay, so that is my plain contention. So this is the next issue. Now there is a Mitaksha school of Hindu law. The allocation of parental property is based on the rule of possession by birth. Moreover, a man can leave his property in his will. The joint family property goes to the group known as co-partners. There are people who belong to the next 3 generations. Hence, joint family property can be by any time converted to separate property. And यहाँ पर देखो ये this line is very important, that son have exclusive right by birth in the joint family property. So this is what the school of Hindu law says, and maybe this is what has been followed on ground. There was an article on the new economic policy, and this new economic policy article is discussed again and again. And let's understand this article. So one of the highlights of this new economic policy is that all the colleges, institutions, universities, they're going to get more autonomy. And this autonomy is into 3 areas. First is academic. The second is administrative. And third is financial. So a college operating, so they'll have academic autonomy that I'll decide maybe a new course. Administration, there'll be less interference. Or in the finances also, that how you invest money or how plan the growth of your institution. So that is how it can be understood. So this is a new economic policy, and the autonomy thing is still not clear, and we have to understand that how this autonomy thing is going to be there on ground. So, but there are concerns also. Right now, what is the problem right now? The problem is there are too much regulation. Okay, so there are bodies. For example, if you're running a college or a school, or for that matter, any institution, so you have to, if you're higher education, EGC, if you're technical evaluation, AICT, and remember these institutions have not been able to ensure quality. And many times, the laws are so strict, or maybe the laws are inflexible, where innovation is almost getting hampered. So that is why the idea of autonomy is very important. But the autonomy also comes with a new system. That is what they're saying. And they're saying that new system might create a new problem of maybe more regulation. So MOVE have raised concern about the politico-bureaucratic interference in the internal functioning of universities. It has also raised concern about the substantial burden on the universities, which have to regulate admissions, set curricula, conduct examination, for a large number of undergrad colleges. Concerns have long existed about over-centralization due to constraints imposed on the potential of premium affiliated colleges to innovate and evolve. These apprehensions about autonomy came to be used by successive government to build a case for a model of the graded autonomy. So ये concerns है. So what kind of autonomy will be there? We don't know. So there are problems, and what the fear right now is that in the name of autonomy, a new system will come, which will kind of replicate the old system, and nothing much will change in ground. In fact, the severity will increase more. The successive government has pushed through the measures that have largely allowed for greater penetration of private capital in higher education. The recommendation of recent education commissions have prompted unequal structure of funding for higher education. Under this hierarchy, higher education was created. Central government funded universities, provincial central government funded universities, regional universities, college funded by state government. So they all come under the higher education hierarchy. So we'll have to see how this autonomy things change. So the article says that the new autonomy is going to be more regulatory in nature, and only time will tell how things will evolve on ground. The National Knowledge Commission stated that good undergraduate colleges are constrained by their affiliate status. The problem is particularly acute for undergraduate colleges which are subject to convoy problem, as they are forced to move out at the speed of the slowest. Which means एक और चीज important है. Right now many colleges are affiliated to some kind of universities, and they do not get freedom. Okay, the freedom is lacking. The first thing there. The second is, let's say this class is there, and right now there are 34 students are there, and so pace of the class, who will decide the pace of the class? It will decide by the understanding part, remember. Okay, for example, 40 students started the class, 6 left, maybe some technical reason, or they felt, okay, this current affair, I'll read it. थोड़ा समझ में आ गया, and I'll read, the current affair. In fact, every day, many students, they say, we have gone through the lectures PDF, sir. We have gone through the videos later on. Okay, because they feel whatever is written in this PDF is what, is what I'm telling. No, I'm going to tell you a lot of new examples and understanding, and maybe that will develop a mental picture. But that is okay. Again, because we are sending video tomorrow, so a lot of people feel that tomorrow easily I'll sit and see the videos. Okay, slowly, instead of sitting 2 hours at a stretch. But in this 2 hour of stretch, I know that you come with a mind frame that you want to sit and study and make, ensure or learn, ask questions, discuss, and then go and revise. So that is a full-fledged approach that is needed. Now, why I'm saying this, the convoy problem is a common problem with every place, where a pace of the class is decided by the slowest student in the class, and that is something that has to be addressed. So there, technology can be there, where we have to come with some self-learning approach, maybe e-learning approach. So the future learning will be a lot of hybrid. In fact, I was thinking that how we can evolve the new learning, how we can ensure that people who are not in Delhi, they get the same kind of maybe resources and maybe support as the people who are not in Delhi. So that is, so in future I would say that hybrid learning is going to be more prevalent, which means there'll be, of course, offline, it will never get replaced, but offline and online is going to be hybrid in future. And that would be true in almost all the businesses and areas as well. Okay. So dominant policy discourse vocally propagates greater autonomy for better performing higher education institutions, under which academic excellence can be supported through grant or special funds, allowing greater power for institutions. The base have been gradually enforced with UGC in 2019, granting public funded universities the right to apply for autonomy based on whether they are ranked in top 500 ranking above the rating of 3.26. NEP is a combination of enhanced centralizing features and specific features of autonomy. Deeper centralization is indicating in the constitution of government nominated umbrella institutions such as HECI, that is Higher Education Council of India, and Board of Governors National Education Commission. So we might come across a new regulation, and maybe there'll be some autonomy in some areas and there'll be new regulation in some other areas. Only time will tell. But will it help in pushing the higher education? We don't know. But I do believe that this new education policy has a lot of flexibility and help for students who want to have flexibility in their learning as well. The model of graded autonomy will encourage hierarchy that exists in different colleges within the public funded institutions. While the best colleges gain the autonomy to bring down their own rules, which means if you run properly, if you have better academic, outcome, then you'll get more autonomy. And at the lower level, the institutes which are not doing so well, their autonomy will get impacted. So that is how things are going to be there. So you can read it. Now, again, the job controversy, and you must have read this job controversy. Recently, it happened in MP. Just last week, it was in Haryana. So because of the job losses in COVID-19 period, uh, every state in their own way, they're trying to ensure that locals get job. Okay, because if the local get job, they will vote, and naturally the ruling party will get advantage. But can government, let's say Madhya Pradesh government says that all the job, public or private, public though I can decide, even the private, public and private both, 80% should go to locals. Okay, which means the migrant population will be suffered. Can they do it constitutionally? Because Article 16 says no, you cannot. Article 16 says that there should be equality opportunity. So that is what this discusses, because many states are trying to move the job quota system. But let's understand the constitutional aspect of that. Can state do that or can state do not do that is something that we have to understand. So let's take some examples. So first is Gujarat. So what does Gujarat says? A policy mandated that industries have to receive government benefit, have to provide 85% job to the local. What is the status? Has remained on paper, Gujarat, the biggest migrant receiving state. So even though law is there, but it is not implemented on ground. Why? Because it is not functional. It is not practically impossible. It is not possible to implement the law on ground. So that is Gujarat. Who works in Gujarat? Of course, people from outside, not the local or common people. The second is Jharkhand, a policy on reservation for locals in government job, under review by current regime. Chhattisgarh, government jobs are for domiciles, recruits migrants in certain areas have as security forces. Private sector have asked to give preference to locals. So preference to local is advisory in nature, which means I can give job whoever I want. Goa, government job restricted to those who are residing in Goa for 15 years have a known Konkani, the state's official language. So if you want to work in Goa in government job, you have to stay for 15 years in Goa first, which means you cannot get a job, your family can get, your children can get, and you have to learn Konkani. Offers incentive to private industries such salary reimbursement if 80% of the employees are Goas. Companies find it cheaper to hire trained workers from other states at lower pay. So that is the status. Even though states have implemented, it cannot may reflect on ground in the same way. The reason is the migrant, the skills will move, and people will. Let's say I'm a private company, so I go to hire the best people. There's nothing to do with your local or your outsider, you're from some other area or you're my relative. For me, your performance will matter. For me, are you skilled? That is what will matter. So there are multiple states have come with this quota move, and recently Madhya Pradesh government decided to reserve all the government job for children of the state. Okay, for children of the state, raises constitutional questions relating the fundamental rights to equality. Because right to equality says that you can't discriminate in job. But there are certain technicalities also. Let's understand. So what is the constitutional provision? Constitution क्या कहता है regarding job? Article 16 of the Constitution guarantees equal treatment under the law in the matters of public employment. It prohibits the state from discriminating on the grounds of place of birth or residence. Article 16(2) states that no citizen shall, on grounds only of religion, race, caste, sex, descent, place of birth, residence, be ineligible or discriminated against in respect to this, which means discrimination cannot happen on the case of religion, caste, sex, place of birth, residence. The provision is supplemented by other clauses in the Constitution that guarantees equality. However, Article 16(3) says that Constitution provides an exception by saying Parliament may make a law prescribing a requirement of residence for job particular state, which means Government of India has the power. They can bring some amendment, and it says that you can give preference to your state people in the job. So that is there, the provision. But state government nahi kar sakta hai. Government of India kar sakta hai. This power solely rests with the parliament and not with the state legislatures. Why does Constitution prohibit reservation based on domicile? When the Constitution came in force, India turned itself into one nation from geographical unit of individual principalities, and idea of universality of Indian citizenship took root. India has single citizenship, and it gives citizens the liberty to move freely around any part of the country. Now, as citizenship is one, India is one geographical country, so you can move anywhere and get a job, which means the local preference should not be there. But The requirement for place of birth or residence cannot be qualification for granting public employment in any state, and that is what it has been mentioned. But क्या हम कह सकते हैं that is followed on ground? That is not true. Why? Because there are some technical clauses which are used. For example, you're from Maharashtra, and government will say you need to know Marathi, okay, and that is a compulsory paper in one of the examination. So naturally, the people who are the resident, the domicile, and the Marathis are going to get advantage. So because if you want to, take a government job in Maharashtra and you're staying in UP, you cannot go and start learning Marathi again and then you look for a government job. So that is not possible. So these are some ways in which the state try to ensure that locals or people who are domicile. Domicile means people staying in the same state should get the job. So what is domicile? Domicile is that you have lived in the state in the state for a certain period. So either your birth is there, or you have lived in the state over a certain period. Okay. So domicile is that in that period, or maybe there is a defined period. Okay, maybe 5 years, 10 years, 8 years, like that kind of definition can be given. Equality enshrined in the Constitution is not a mathematical equality and does not mean all citizens will be treated alike without any distinction. To this effect, Constitution underlines two distinct aspects of equality law. The first is among equal, no discrimination. That means a right to equality, Article 14. So among equals, everybody is equal. Okay, so right to equality, among equal, there will be no discrimination. But among unequals, you might discriminate. So affirmative action to equalize the unequal. For example, reservation. So you give reservation to whom? The unequal. The SCs, the STs, the OBCs, okay, women, EWS. So these are relatively unequal. So they might get a benefit of that. So that is allowed. So right to equality is important. So right to equality, everybody is equal under law. But what about people who are unequal? What about people who are unequal and they need the support? The Supreme Court has ruled against reservation based on place of birth or residence. In 1994, Pradeep Jain was Union of India. The issue of son of the soil was discussed. The court expressed an opinion that such policies would be unconstitutional, but not expressively rule that, as the case was on different aspect of right to equality. Okay, so unconstitutional hoga, but they did not say that it will be under right to equality. So let's say there have been multiple ruling. All the multiple ruling are saying there was the court verdict in 2002, where Supreme Court in Rajasthan said that it cannot be allowed. In UP also, they said that it will be given to only original resident of UP. High Court Allahabad struck down. It said it is against the Constitution. Similarly, Supreme Court affirmed the observation that strike down state government policy that get 5% extra vote to candidates. So, matlab ye hai, in short, that the local preference to your state people is not allowed legally in the Constitution, but they use some other way. What about securing jobs for locals in the private sector? Remember, private sector want independence and freedom. And let's not mix, social problem with economic problem. Social problem and economic problem are different. Okay, so such law will be difficult to implement even if allowed. Private players do not go an annual recruitment drive to fill the vacancies, and they hire as when required. The states can recommend a preference to locals, but ensuring it will be difficult. In Karnataka, a similar legislation, but it was dropped against the state, Advocate General which raised question on legality. In 2019, state government once again issued a notification to asking private employers to prefer Kannadigas in the blue collar job. Kannadiga means Karnataka people. Okay, so private co legally by law you cannot force them. You can just urge them and you can give some incentive. Only incentives. So I think incentive based system can be there, but still the companies will hire people which whom they feel will work for them. Okay, so let's move to the next topic. Exercising the powers it has, Article 16(3), Parliament enacted Public Employment Requirement as to Residence Act. The act aimed at abolishing all existing residence requirement in states and enacting exceptions only in the case of Andhra Pradesh, Manipur, Tripura, and Himachal Pradesh. Which means the constitution में law बना, it said that it is not allowed in other states except these states. Why? Because especially the tribal states or states which I would say has certain extra requirement. Okay. Some states have gone around the mandate 16.2 by using the language. States that conduct official business in their official region like prescribe knowledge of their language as a criterion. This ensures local citizens are preferred for job. For example, Maharashtra, West Bengal, and Tamil Nadu, you require a language test. So, iski wajah se through language test, they are able to ensure that the jobs are given. So, this I believe that Madhya Pradesh recent decision, is not possible. Setting up of National Recruitment Agency. So, what is National Recruitment Agency? Recently, government has come with said that so we have multiple exams. There is a bank PO exam, there is a SSC exam, so all these exams, why don't we merge? And these exams are mainly for non-gazetted officers. Okay, so all these exams, why don't we merge and have just one exam? Okay, so that is what. So National Recruitment Agency will conduct a common eligibility test for recruitment for government jobs. It will conduct CET for 3 sectors: railway, staff selection, and Institute of Banking, IBPS. Okay, so IBPS is banking, Railway Recruitment Board, and SSC, Staff Selection Commission. It will held separately for 3 levels: graduate, 12th pass, and 10th pass. An examination will be conducted in online. Okay, twice a year in 12 languages. Abhi kya hota hai? Only 2 languages, either English or Hindi. So let's have 12 languages based on common curriculum, and the scores will be valid for 3 years. Okay, which means if you qualify the exam, the scores will be valid for 3 years, and the student can write multiple tests, and their best score will be taken into account. So this is what happens in bodies like GMAT or GRE, international examinations. So we are following that pattern. According to DOPT, around 1.525 lakh vacancies every year in Group B and Group C, are there, and 2.5 crore people apply to fill these vacancies. So if you think that UPSC is a tough exam, believe me, every exam in the country is tough. If you think that UPSC, is an exam where 3 out of 3 lakh people, or maybe 3.5 lakh people, 1,000 get selected, so you can see these numbers. So out of 2.5 crore people, only 1.25 lakh get. That means just 0.5% of people get job. Okay. For UPSC, that number is around 0.3 or 0.4%. So nothing much, right? The difference is almost same. Okay. So let's understand this. So Union Cabinet has approved the creation of National Recruitment Agency for conducting common eligibility tests for government jobs. Non-gazetted means for gazetted people have certain power of authority or maybe signing. So these people do not have. So NRA will be society registered under Societies Registration Act, headed by a chairman of the rank of Secretary to the Government of India. It will have representatives of Ministry of Railways, Ministry of Finance, SSCs, RRBs, and IBP. And it will be a specialist body to bring state-of-the-art technology, and that is how the CET will be conducted. So the good thing about this National Recruitment Agency is that one exam, only one body will conduct exam. There will be only one exam. That exam will be, you can give any number of time, and the best score will be taken, and that exam will be conducted twice a year, every 6 months maybe. Okay, and it will be online. And another thing is that it will have 1,000 centers across India, and every city in India will have centers, which means you don't have to travel, in bus or train to give examination in some other city. The test aims to replace multiple examinations conducted by different recruiting agencies for selection of government job advertised each year with a single online test, and it will be held twice a year. It will be conducted in 12 Indian major languages, and earlier the paper were only in English and Hindi. To begin with, CET will cover recruitment made by 3 agencies: Staff Selection Commission, Railway Recruitment Board, and the IBPS, that is banking, and it is done in the phased manner. So that is, I think it's one of the best thing that the government has done, especially for competitive examination, the one-day examination. So all these are one-day examination. Okay, so I think it's a very good effort. It will have 1,000 centers across India in a bid to remove currently prevalent urban bias, and there will be an examination center in every district of the country. There will be special thrust on creating examination infrastructure in 117 aspirational districts. The CET will be first level test to sort candidates, and score will be valid for 3 years. There will be no restrictions on number of attempts you can. आपका upper limit है. Like for example, right now UPSC there are 4 attempts. No, here no like that. Sorry, not 4 attempts, 6 attempts. This was 4 in my time. So right now, let's say your upper limit is 29 age. So up to 29 years of age, you can give. You are 21, so you can give exam every year twice, 2 times, and the best score will be counted. Remember. So there is no restriction on the number of attempts to be taken by the candidate, subject to the upper age limit. Age relaxation will be given for SC and ST, the candidate. So that is the very good point of that. अभी students के लिए क्या advantage होगा? The first is you don't have to appear in multiple examination. There will be single examination fee. The exam will be held in every district. ठीक है? There'll be, and it will bring down the cost of travel, lodging. Exam will be held in their own district. That will encourage more and more women candidates also to apply. Applicants are required to register on the single registration portal, and no need to worry about the clashing of the examination date. So these are the advantage, and I think the biggest one is that women can also give the exam. Right now, women, if they have to travel 200 kilometers, 500 kilometers, they practically are not able to give the examination. And you are filling 10 forms. Instead of now, you have just fill one form, and that will take care of everything. It removes the hassle of connecting preliminary screening tests of the candidates, drastically reduces the security recruitment cycle, brings standardization in the examination process, and reduce costs for agencies, which is almost 600 crore savings expected. So these are the advantages of these examination institutions. You can read them. So this NRA is a very important initiative. Now there is a topic called, yeah, it's an internal security topic. So I'll just discuss a little bit. Okay, so let's understand this topic, but before understanding, I'll give a little background for 5 minutes so that the understanding is more lucid. So what is the problem? Now, Northeast has been an area which is not quite stable, but historically in the period of 1950s and 60s, there were unstable areas, especially Nagaland, Manipur, Mizoram. In fact, every Northeast state, because remember the entire Northeast population, it's a tribal areas, or you can say there is a presence of tribal belt. Among the tribal belt, the Nagas are the most maybe the fierce ones, and they are very specific about their cultural identity, their history, and they said that we should have our own country, and that is what they demanded. But when the Constitution of India was made, Article 1, what it says, India of Bharat is a union of states, and the union is indestructible. Which means the state can be made multiple states, but once you're a part, it's a one-way route. You can become a part of Indian Union. You can become a part of Indian Union, but you can't break away if you want to. So that is a very common. So Article 1 of Indian Constitution says Union, Bharat, union of state, and it is indestructible. Indestructible means that any state cannot leave India. That is what it said. But moment these areas, Nagaland, Manipur, Northeast areas were taken as a part of India, became of India, they started demanding freedom. They're demanding autonomy, and some of them were happy with the freedom and autonomy. Others said, no, we want to break away from India. And Manipur and Nagaland were at the forefront. Now, naturally, Indian government is strong, the might is strong, so we employed security forces. But when the common Naga people have the same feeling, by putting military or force, then you can't give them what they want, but every time the security issue is there, you have to enforce, or you have to put mobilize forces. The security forces are in the lakhs of numbers, were there in lakhs of numbers, so that was there. And the Nagas, they started an insurgency movement, and in that insurgency movement, so what Nagas wanted, that they should have a Naga limb, okay, and this Naga limb will have areas of Nagaland, and other states also, including Myanmar, and they want to create a land for Nagas, the Naga tribes. So let's understand the Naga polity and aspirations. And they had multiple leaders, but now things are kind of settling, and maybe Nagas have accepted that if they are part of India, then that is the only future, good future for them. Because the young population, they have realized that you can't आप हमेशा fight नहीं कर सकते हो. You can't fight. The generations have fought for their freedom, but now the only thing that is possible for them is that you sustain the process and you become part of India's mainland. Because we have given freedom also. जो उनको चाहिए था वो maximum freedom दे दिया था. Only thing that you can't leave India's constitution. So Naga family comprises of 25 tribes. Each of these is proud owner and inheritor of distinct language, culture, tradition, geography, supporting a distinct worldview. However, many Nagas aspire to a Naga unity and they view those tribe loyalties as residues to pre-modern past and obstacle to Naga solidarity. Okay. Naga nationalism is connected with the idea that Naga homeland, and that includes contiguous areas in number of northern states, even in Myanmar. So that is what they say that you create a new area where the majority Naga population is living, and it will be a new country. That is what they demanded in 50s and 60s. But in recent time, they have kind of accepted that you give us more freedom and we can be in the parts. So negotiations are happening between government and the Naga people, the leaders of Nagas, and that is called Naga peace process. But almost 1 decade se jo hai chal raha hai, and let's see how things turn out. So there is a concept of unique history formulation. The source of the phrase can be traced back to joint communique between NSC and IM General Secretary T. Muaya and former Home Secretary K. Padmana Bhaiya, signed in Amsterdam in July 11, 2002. And the first unique history is not self-explanatory. Let's understand. So what is unique history? So Nagas say that why we are different, remember, because we have a unique history, and because of this unique history, you help us and meet our demands. We are not other people like other part of India people, whatever they are. We are different, and you meet our demand. For example, the characteristics of long favored security bureaucrats of Naga struggle as separate insurgency or terrorist movement that makes false claim to Naga unity are inaccurate. So what they say that this unique history does not want to tell the world that we are insurgents or we are terrorists and we are taking for Naga unity. They are saying that, see, we are asking a demand, and hence you see the demand in that way. Don't maybe tell the whole world that we fought in Indian government and that struggle it was against the Indian mighty state. No, that should not be there. The second is rejecting those labels. Separatist insurgency or terrorist movement is necessary condition of negotiations based on mutual respect. So now what the government has also accepted that, see, you had a grievance, you wanted to leave India earlier, but now you are ready to listen to us and you are ready to be a part of that. So let's accept that. And the Naga say, see, don't treat us like a normal militant or terrorist, because we are different, we have a unique history, and hence you have to accede to our demand. हमारे demand को आपको meet करना होगा. And that peace process or negotiations has been going on since decade, and this is what this article talks about. There was signal achievement that should not be allowed to wither away. Negotiation with NSCN issues that NSCN has declared Shillong Accord 975 as sellout and betrayal of Naga cause, but it emerged as serious political force precisely because it stood for the Naga unity. However, it argued that appeal is limited to the Tangbul tribe of Manipur only. So how things will turn, only time will tell. Now you can see this Naga peace process. Why delay in resolution? Proud race, unique language, culture, holding unique history. Okay, the dilemma is there. Can we have a better future with India, or can we have a separate nation? Okay, क्या India के साथ जाएं या ना जाएं? Okay, there's a high degree of tribal loyalty, and this tribal loyalty impact the peace process. And there are multiple divisions on right out. Multiple division is there. So one group wants to make peace with India, so other group will revolt. Okay, so we have to see that. And there was a framework agreement that was signed on 15. So that is a recent ones. So abhi jo peace process hai, we are trying to improve that, and only time will tell how things are. What are the new Nagas ka demand kya tha? Dekho, they wanted a new country, and that new country will call Greater Nagaland. It will have Nagaland, Arunachal Pradesh, मणिपुर, असम एंड सम पार्ट्स ऑफ असम. तो नागालैंड पूरा रहेगा और बाकी सारा स्टेट का भी थोड़ा थोड़ा पार्ट रहेगा. Okay, but they kind of settled with time, and now they have come on board and the process is going on. बहुत सारी चीजें न्यूज में आ रही हैं, डिबेट में आ रही हैं, but still I think there are certain still the areas where Nagas have problem, and that is why government is not coming with a clear cut peace process. A more nuanced negotiation strategy is now emerging, is a positive development, but a fundamental question about is that who are the stakeholders in the Naga conflict are, and still needs satisfactory answer, and one that is based on in-depth mapping of the conflict. Only then we can expect a peaceful dialogue and patient negotiations to end the conflict and bring about the peace. So यही सारा है history. I'll be discussing this topic in detail in the internal security area. Okay. So now we'll take a new topic, Satluj Yamuna Link Canal project. So Indus has some tributaries, and they are mainly the Punjab rivers are Ravi, Byas, Satluj. Okay. So, and then there is a Yamuna also. So Haryana and Punjab were together as one state, and then the state was created. So, but after division of state, water share had been a water sharing of the rivers was a big problem. And in order to solve that, Satluj Yamuna link was proposed, and that is going on since decades. But still, that issue is there. So let's understand. Opposing the Satluj Yamuna link canal project and stating the claim to Yamuna's water, Punjab CM warned about repercussion. Here is a look at the decades-old issue and why the issue has come up again. At the time of the reorganization of Punjab in 1966, the issue of sharing of water was discussed between both the states. Punjab refused to share water of Ravi and Byas with Haryana, stating that it was against the riparian principle. Before reorganization in 1945, the Ravi's water was shared, and then इसमें जो undivided Punjab को मिला, that was 7.2 MAF. Okay, then out of 7.2 MAF to Punjab did not want to share any water to Haryana. अब देखो, earlier Haryana was a part of Punjab, but now Haryana is created, Punjab is not ready to share the water. Why? Because of the political reasons. At the same time, the farmers in the Punjab region, they felt that if the water will go away, probably we'll face problem. In March 1976, the Punjab Reorganization Act was implemented and center notified fresh allocation providing 3.5 MAF to Haryana. So इसमें से 3.5 उन्होंने कह दिया कि आप हरियाणा को दो. Later in 1981, the water flowing down the Byas and Ravi was revised and pegged at 17 MAF, out of which 4.22 was allocated to Punjab and 3.5 to Haryana. Finally, to provide this allocated share of water to southern parts. अभी allocation हो रहा है, but river का water हरियाणा तक नहीं पहुंच रहा है. Remember, you are making state is making an effort where water will be given to Haryana, but remember, for that you have to make a canal. So in order to ensure that the allocated water reaches the southern part of Haryana, a canal linking Satluj with the Yamuna cutting across was planned. Finally, the construction of 214 canal was started in April 1982, and out of which 120 km was run through Punjab and rest through the Haryana. तो ये जो canal है आपका, this canal, so you are taking the Satluj water and you want to add in the Yamuna canal. So this is a Haryana side and this is the Punjab side. So the Punjab side is not ready. They have built their side, Haryana side. But what Punjab is saying that if the water will go from here to here, the Satluj will have less water. So this whole area, which are dependent on the Satluj water, will face problem. This whole area will depend on the face problem. And right now there is this acute water crisis which are still going in Punjab. And what Punjab says that we provided food to India in the Green Revolution, and the water was exploited. The groundwater is exploited, and only water that is left today is the river water. And if you take that water also, then there is a problem. But the government of India says that as per the principle of water sharing, some water has to be given to all the state because it is a common resource. It is not a state's resource, but it's a common resource. But when government of India tries to do that, many states take objection to that because they say maybe we have first right because of the reasons. and that creates problem. Haryana has completed its side of the canal, but work in Punjab has been hanging for over 3 decades. The issue is back on centre's stage with Haryana. Supreme Court directed CM of Punjab and Haryana to negotiate and settle the dispute. तो अभी जो Supreme Court ने कहा कि you both of you sit down and try to resolve the issue. Apex Court asked for meeting at the highest political level to mediated by the centre so that states reach a consensus on this canal, and meeting remained inconclusive, with the centre expressing the view that construction of the SYL canal should be completed, but Punjab CM refused categorically. He said, I will not come. The dispute is based on bloody history of around SY Canal. The troubled days of terrorism in Punjab started in the early 90s when the SIL started. Punjab feels that it utilizes its precious groundwater resources to grow crops for the entire country and should not be forced to share its water as it faces desertification. It is feared that once the construction of canal restart, the youth may start feeling that state has been discriminated against. Punjab CM fears that Pakistan and secessionist organization could exploit this and foment trouble in the state. In short, it is a political reason, and also the resource is also a problem. If I have been using a resource from so many years, and if I have to say that you share this resource with some other state also, because that state was a part of your state, maybe 40 years ago, then probably I will also have a problem. But remember, we have to find a solution to that. Punjab is facing severe water crisis due to over exploitation of groundwater aquifers in the wheat paddy monocycle. And according to the Central Underground Water Authority, underground water is overexploited to meet the agriculture requirement in 79% of the area of the state. Out of 138 blocks, 109 are overexploited, 2 are critical, 5 are semi-critical, and 22 are in the safe category, which means water crisis is happening in the Punjab. So that completes this. The state wants a tribunal. Punjab expects a new tribunal seeking a fresh time-bound assessment of the water availability. The state has been saying that till date there has been no adjudication or scientific assessment of the Punjab river waters. So they want that this a fresh body should come. Tribunal is like a court, and that will give a verdict on that. So that completes the Satluj Yamuna link canal project. Now, let's take the China twist to Teesta challenge. So Teesta is a river which starts, you can see here, it starts, from Sikkim, it goes inside, then it goes to West Bengal, and then it goes to West Bengal, and then goes to, this whole Bengal is there. Okay, it goes to Bengal, and then eventually it goes to Bangladesh. Now, problem here is that the Teesta river, whatever water is going, so Bangladesh wants a rule to ensure that they are able to, use the water properly, and maybe dam should be built, or maybe rules should be decided. Let's say 100 water is coming from Teesta. So how much should go to, West Bengal or India, or how much should go to, to them? Okay, that is Bangladesh. So, and this negotiation is going on since decades, and we are still facing the problem. But the problem here is the West Bengal. West Bengal says that if you start giving more water to the Bangladesh, so that will not be good for the people of Bangladesh, West Bengal, and hence we do not want to share. So beach ka rasta jo nikalna hai, the sharing deal between India and Bangladesh, we are not able to do that. Bangladesh is discussing almost 1 billion loan from China for comprehensive management and restoration project on the Teesta river. The discussions are with China come at the time when India is particularly wary about the China's following their standoff in Ladakh. The project is aimed at managing the water basin efficiently, controlling floods, and tackling water crisis in summers. India and Bangladesh have been engaged in the long-standing dispute over water sharing within the Teesta. The two countries were on the verge of signing water sharing in September 11, but West Bengal CM objected, and the new government wanted that a fair solution to Teesta cooperation might happen. But 5 years later, Teesta issue still remain resolved. So Teesta issue, India and Bangladesh के diplomatic relation में एक important issue है, and hence if we are able to resolve this issue, then in long run it is good for India's relation with our neighbor. But problem क्या है? Mamata Banerjee, because Mamata Banerjee thinks that if the more water is shared with Bangladesh, in that situation their state that West Bengal will get less water. and that is what she does not want to compromise. New Delhi has had a good relationship with Dhaka, especially after 2008. India has benefited from the security ties with Bangladesh, whose crackdown against anti-India output has helped Indian government to maintain peace in the eastern and northeastern state. तो बांग्लादेश से हमने अच्छा relationship जो बनाया, that helped India, and it helped that helped India. Why? Because जो बहुत सारे terrorist organizations थे, anti-India outfits थे in Bangladesh who were getting support, they were able to control by Bangladesh, and that is good for internal security of India. So Bangladesh has benefited from the economic and development partnership, and today Bangladesh is India's biggest trade partner in the South Asia. Okay, and also Bangladesh, lot of people, 15-20 lakh visas are even given to Bangladesh nationals who come for medical treatment, entertainment in India. But what have been the recent problems? The first is, of course, Bangladesh has been a key partner in India's first neighborhood policy and possibly the success story in the bilateral ties among its neighbors. However, there have been recent irritants in the relationship. These include proposed country-wide NRC and Citizenship Amendment Act passed in December last year. The Bangladesh has insisted that while CA and the proposed NRC were internal matters of India, CA move were not necessary. Because CA क्या कहता है that the persecuted minorities from other countries, that is Pakistan, India, Bangladesh and Afghanistan, if they come, they will, unka citizenship hum fast track karenge. So means people coming from Bangladesh which are non-Muslims will get an advantage here. Now this has created problem between the diplomatic relations, because ये matter जो है, it is, the government or a lot of people say that this issue has become anti-Muslim, because you are allowing other people but we're not allowing Muslims. What government has to say, see, these countries are already Islamic countries, and so a Muslim is not going to try to come to India, but being Islamic country, the other religion are persecuted there, and these part, whichever part which is coming, which we are allowing, these areas were part of India historically. Yani pehle hi India ka part the. So many people stayed back because they felt that maybe that is what it is important, or maybe that is okay, because they felt that okay, even though Muslims are here in majority, that's okay. But with dynamics, the persecution of the anti-Muslims started happening there, the non-Muslims started happening there, and that led to the problem where India felt that it should come to rescue. So the same thing happened in 50s also in the beginning, when Jawaharlal Nehru kind of tried the same kind of thing. But in recent time, when government of India said that a lot of people, lakhs of people who are staying in India and who are who are minority in those countries and were persecuted, unka citizenship hum fast track kar denge. And that led to a situation where a lot of people said that this is against constitution, this is against Muslim. So whole debate is like that. So maybe they say that all the countries, especially Bangladesh, which has Muslim population, हमारा relationship जो है खराब हो जाएगा. Then again, what we are witnessing here, that Bangladesh is having good relationship with China also in recent time. China is trying to help Bangladesh, and that is the only reason why China is doing that, because China knows that if Bangladesh comes on board closer to India, then things might change. So China is the biggest trading partner of Bangladesh and is the foremost source of import. In 2019, the trade was 18 billion. Okay. Recently, China declared zero duty on 97% of import from Bangladesh. The concession flowed from China duty-free, quota-free program to LDC. So China ने क्या किया है, जो बांग्लादेश से सामान आता है उन पे ड्यूटी फ्री हटा दिया है, and that is what they are doing. The move is widely welcomed in Bangladesh, with the expectation that Bangladesh exports to China will increase, and China has promised 30 billion worth of financial assistance to Bangladesh in the coming years. Additionally, strong defense ties with China make situation complicated, because China is the biggest arms supplier to Bangladesh, as has been a legacy issue. Recently, Bangladesh purchased 2 MiG-class submarines from China. ठीक है, तो इस तरह से जो है आप कह सकते हो that things are there. So post CA we have done in the COVID-19 support, the cooperation, railways. Recently, the first trial run of transshipment of Indian cargo through Bangladesh to northeast state. Now it's like this is India, right? Okay, and so this is Bangladesh. Okay, so this is Bangladesh and this is northeast. So now we can easily, now this is landlocked, remember. So you can easily go to northeast by going to Bangladesh, their port, and then you can go here. So that is called transshipment of Indian cargo through Bangladesh to northeastern state under the pact on the use of Chittagong and Mongla port. So Chittagong Mongla port कहाँ पर है? Bangladesh में है, and through that the items can go to northeast directly, and India will not have to travel the whole like that. Okay, if I have to reach here, I have to go the whole like that. So the distance will come down, and Bangladesh can help us in that. Okay, so that is the post CA engagement, and let's see how things go in the coming years. The two sides agreed the implementation of projects should be done in a timely manner. Bangladesh sought to return of Tablighi Jamaat members impacted by lockdown. Bangladesh requested urgent reopening of visa reissues in the Indian High Commission in Dhaka, particularly since many Bangladeshi patients need to visit India. India was also requested to reopen travels with Benopol, Petra Pole land port, which has been halted by West Bengal in the height of pandemic. So pandemic se movement, travel, all that has impacted. So Bangladesh wants that India should consider its demand. But in the backdrop, ये river का भी controversy है. China's is entry is also a controversy, and that is how the things are there. So India should try to resolve the issue. India should try to reach out to there. The Teesta project, should be resolved as early as possible. थोड़ा सा हमें liberal होना पड़ेगा, otherwise this will create problems. Total length 151 kilometers. Sikkim West Bengal boundary 142 and Bangladesh 121 kilometers. Okay, so that is the whole thing is there. So you can see here, there was an 83 agreement where it said that 39% should stay in the water in India, 36% to Bangladesh, and 25% allocated. In 2011, an interim deal that supposed to last for 15 years gave 42%, 42.5% to India and 37% of Teesta water to Bangladesh. So, but ये अभी resolve नहीं हो पाया है, that issue is still there. So that completes China's twist to Teesta challenge. Clear हो गया? Now Pakistan-Saudi rift. Now recently, remember Pakistan and Saudi Arabia have been very good friends. But recently income differences have started because India is getting closer to South Arabia and UAE. And this is, remember why this is happening, because India, UAE and Saudi Arabia feels that India could be a place for business. In the historical time period in 60s, 16 onwards, the income from Saudi Arabia, income mainly came from oil. But now Saudi Arabia knows that it cannot sustain the income as it was doing, and things should change. And the only way of doing that would be maybe reform the economy and start doing business from other areas as well. So Saudi Arabia is looking at investment opportunities, and it is two-way, allowing Saudi Arabian companies to come to India, Indian companies coming, going to Saudi Arabia, tap the market, and that is the way forward. So now Pakistan is a little unhappy with Saudi Arabia because the kind of support, especially on the Kashmir issue or the other issue which Saudi Arabia used to give earlier, is not happening. So Saudi Arabia अब India से नजदीक आ रहा है, and I would say it's a very good example of maybe a strong diplomacy, and that shows that India is playing its card well here at least. Okay, so the rift between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia over Jammu and Kashmir is out and open after delegation led by Pak Army was denied a meeting with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, MBS. So relationship with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan are most prominent in 1971 war. Saudi Arabia also reported to have transferred arms and equipment and loan of 75 aircraft to Pakistan. After the war, Saudi Arabia consistently supported the call for return of Pakistan prisoner of war and dropping Dhaka trial against 195 then. After the war, Saudi Arabia gave loans to Pakistan, of 1,977,000, including F-16s and Harpoon missiles. So आप देखो कितना strong relationship है. Saudi Arabia has always helped Pakistan, especially against the conflict with India, and the Saudi oil and dollars have kept Pakistan economy on its feet after sanctions following the nuclear test. For the last 2 decades, Saudi Arabia has provided oil, deferred payment, Saudi funding to madrasas has led to mushrooming rather giving rise to religious extremism. 1990, Pakistan sent its ground forces to defend Saudi Arabia against Iraq invasion in Kuwait. So बहुत सारे issues हैं. Dhaka trial was in 1971 war. Okay, it was the 1971 war where India captured Dhaka, the whole Bangladesh. Remember, it was at that time it was East Pakistan. Remember, alignment over Kashmir at the Organization of Islamic Conference crystallized in 1990 when the insurgency of J&K began. While the OIC has issued statement over the last 3 decades, it has become a ritual of little significance to India. Last year, India revoked Article 370 in Kashmir. Pakistan lobbied with OIC. So, एक organization है, Organization of Islamic Conference (OIC), and OIC is a Muslim countries. So they always, with the, of course, Pakistan's insistence, they always question, that J&K issue should be resolved, and they are on the Pakistan side. Okay. So, but Pakistan lobbied for the AIC with the condemnation of the India's move. So, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia and UAE issued statement. They were nuanced rather than harshly critical of India. Over the last year, Pakistan has tried to rouse the sentiment among the Islamic countries, but only handful of them, that is Turkey and Malaysia, has publicly criticized India. So, Turkey bhi thoda anti-India hai, and Malaysia is also a little anti-India. But other people, I'm talking about the Muslim countries, the Middle East, have been very close to India and supporting India in all the respect. And that is, we can say, maybe a very good point. But that is also, remember, because India has become a strong economy, India is becoming a bigger economy, and the things changing. The Saudi Arabia change in position has been graded response process under Crown Prince MBS, as it seeks to diversify from its heavily oil-dependent economy, and it sees India a valuable partner in the region. New Delhi, for its part, has wooed the Arab world over the last 6 years. And from Saudi Arabia to UAE, it worked the diplomatic levers through high-level visits and dangled opportunities for investment and business. MBS, who is looking to invest in India, has taken a realistic view, along with UAE Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed. Okay, so that is what it is there. So Saudi Arabia wants to make a good relation with India because it sees India as a future partner in business. Saudi Arabia is the 4th largest trade partner and major source of energy. India imports 18% of the crude oil from Kingdom. Saudi Arabia is also a major source of LPG for India. And with India stopping oil imports from Iran due to threat of US sanctions, Saudi Arabia is a key in this aspect. So abhi kya ho raha hai, that this is what is irking Pakistan. It is, and Pakistan thoda isolate bhi ho gaya hai. Remember, but as I mentioned, if you remember what I said, the stronger the India is in terms of economy, jitna India ka economy strong hoga, okay, the stronger India's economy is, the dynamics will change on ground, because everybody will come together. So we have to work on ensuring that India becomes a strong country and strong economy, and the rest will take care. The tension between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan has been brewing for some time. In 2015, Pakistan Parliament decided not to support Saudi military effort in the Yemen region. Later, Pakistan Army General led Saudi-led Islamic military alliance to fight terrorism, comprising of 41 Muslim countries. After Pulwama attack, it was Saudi Arabia and UAE that pulled their weight to get Wing Commander Abhinandan released. Saudi Crown Prince visited Pakistan and India at that time and made it clear that he valued economic opportunities. He did not wade into Kashmir issue in India and terrorism issue in Pakistan. So abhi sab log practical ho gaye, everyone want to do business, and that is the reason. And but Pakistan is trying all its way out. Maybe some countries are supporting, but majority of them are not siding with Pakistan. A year after 370 was revoked, Qureshi quelled the bat. Pak accused Saudi Arabia has failed to deliver on the Kashmir, and OIC has not played a leadership role in the backing of Pakistan against India. This angered Saudi Arabia, which in November 2018 had announced 6.2 billion loan package for Pakistan. The package included 3 billion in loans and oil credit facility amounting to 3.2 billion. Okay, so Riyadh demanded the return of 3 billion loans and refused to sell the oil to Islamabad on deferred payment. Pakistan immediately returned 1 billion, displaying the rift. But in the current economic situation, Pakistan is unable to pay the next tranche. Next tranche means the next payment. And what has also angered Saudi Arabia is that Pakistan has been trying to pander to Turkey and Malaysia. Or Turkey and Saudi Arabia ka purana history hai. They are not allies, they are opponents. So these are the factors which are happening, and Pakistan-Saudi rift is more prominent today. China factor. Pakistan and China have called themselves all-weather iron brothers. And during last year, Beijing has supported Pakistan on Kashmir, raising the issue at United Nations Security Council. China has also emerged as Pakistan's biggest benefactor through funding of China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Okay, so ये सारे factors भी हैं. Pander means maybe reach out to them. You kind of heed to that demand. Saudi Arabia too has invested in CPEC project to the tune of $10 million, but Pakistan now looks towards Beijing for both diplomatic and economic support. Okay, so ये सारा जो issue है. Now China, Pakistan, China will always be a good friend, but what I feel that Saudi Arabia will play a very smart game, and they will not take a very strong support to Pakistan. So that is a good point, I think, and that is also because of the dynamics on the ground. Okay, so these are Pakistan-Saudi rift. Now there is Namat Basai. So this is a factual. I'm discussing this is because I think it's important for prelims examination. The state government unique program for teaching tribal children in their mother tongue and has become a runaway hit in Kerala's tribal district. The NBB is implemented by Samagra Shiksha Kerala. It has succeeded in retaining hundreds of tribal children in their online classes or making them feel at home through language of instruction, and has distributed 50 laptops exclusively. So, question क्या आएगा? What is Namat Basai? So, Namat Basai is a education program in Kerala tribal districts. Okay, so that completes. Okay, they have questions also. Some students were asking me that, sir, you should put questions. So I put some questions. You can practice some mains answer here. I can see a number of students, online with thoda sa current affair is sometimes heavy. Okay, so that has, that is almost over. Now I'll go to some. Okay, so I covered most of them. Now the topics like Digital Quality of India Index, read them. These are factual topics. Online pharmacy regulation in India. So government is trying to regulate online pharmacy like NetMed and all. Okay, so the article is that. National Strategy of Financial Education. It's like again a factual thing is there. You can do that. I've covered all this. Domicile, all that has been covered. So you can cover these important points. Okay, some factual things are there. So that is all for today, guys. You can ask some questions. And one more thing, CSAT is going to start. So CSAT will be going to extra class. So this week CSAT will have just one class. Okay, because the CSAT sir, he's going to be available from next week properly. So we'll just take one lecture tomorrow at 4 p.m. Remember, it is an extra lecture. Extra classes will happen, and students who feel that they don't want to do CSAT right now, again the CSAT will be repeated in Feb and March. Remember, so the CSAT module is for everybody, even my offline students who for some reason who are not able to complete. So it will be completed. It will taken again in Feb March. So if you want, you can attend the CSAT lecture for revision practice, but it will be extra class. 3 days a week class will be there. This week there will be only one class. Next week it will be 2 class, and then it will be 3 classes a week. Okay, so that is all it is. So any questions, guys, you have, you can ask me. Then I'll close for the day.